All right, welcome back to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie, Karl Jensen. G'day, Karl.
How you going, Luke? Happy
Good,
Friday.
mate. Always good on a Friday, Karl. G'day, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you? G'day, Karl.
Nigel, pleasure of your company as always.
Apparently, I talk too much. For those who missed the off-air circumstances, it's going to be a competition here to see who says the less.
Just to fill them in, Karl said that Nigel can talk. What was the phrase you used, Karl?
A lot.
A lot.
All right, Nigel, we were just talking as well about some of the news coming out of AEMO too. Yeah, what's going on?
Oh, a lot of stuff coming out of AEMO and the AEMC. In fact, the one that got me super excited was the AEMC report. They handed down their final report, and it's kind of high-level stuff. But, you know, the one that really got me super excited this week was the fact they've handed down their final report on smart meters. And what do we know about smart meters? Apart from Victoria, where it's mandated, everywhere else, the take-up's about 20%, right? It's very, very low. And basically, AEMO, after a very, very long process that I've talked about before, started right back in 2012, they've said, well, smart meters are a good thing. Everyone agrees. 160 submissions. Pretty much everyone agrees. It's going to save money. How much? $507 million is available for owners and networks and the homeowners and everyone else if we can just get smart meters going. So they've now set a target date of 100% uptake of smart meters by 2030. That's one of the key findings of this report. There was a whole bunch of stuff in there. The other thing that was really exciting to me was seeing that they believe that live data, which is available in these meters, needs to be released as well. And there are a whole lot of benefits that can flow from live data. So there's a lot of work to do yet before all of this changes. And of course, some of the people responding were arcing up and whatnot. And there are some real challenges. It's a complicated space. But good news is the proliferation of solar and renewables and everything else is driving this forward at a rate of knots. There are benefits. It's been accounted for now. There's $500 million worth of savings. Let's get on with it.
And the other good news was that renewables made up 37.5% of generation too. So that's pretty substantial.
A new record. That's the rolling average. I was looking at that report just before. That is the rolling average for the year. So we've seen peaks way higher than that, but it is a new record. It's also, of course, a new record for the low input, the lowest ever input of coal-fired energy in Australia. So solar's inexorable rise continues. This is part of what's driving all the mechanical changes and all the metering changes and all the data changes and everything else that's behind it. As they can see, it's just going. It's going one direction, and it's going.
But there's a lot of nervous commentary too, right? They're talking about grid stability, talking about blackouts and reliability as well. So that's been in the media this week too.
It certainly has, and I'd actually encourage, when you're bored, if you're a bit of an energy nerd like all of us. Well, perhaps it's just me, but jump on AEMO's website or the AER's website or the AEMC's website and have a dig around. I actually watched some fascinating webinars the other day, and they are predicting 75% penetration of renewables within just a few years. And they can see that it's coming, and that's the conservative case. 100% is really very, very close. So once these barriers, if these barriers continue to drop, transmission's a real barrier, distribution's a real barrier, smart meters we've still got barriers out there and challenges. But man, it's just
interconnection. I mean, that's a huge issue.
Exactly.
The backlog of major projects that are already done, already sold, signed off, and they just can't interconnect in some cases for years.
Yeah, that's right.
Victoria's got more than 3 gigawatts of wind online now. And last year it's some amazing amount of energy produced. They got at least a 30% capacity factor. So 9 and a bit gigawatt hours worth of wind power in the grid. Just crazy numbers. That's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of money being pumped in, no doubt.
We've got a special guest today. Emily Driscoll is from Off Grid Energy Australia. She's a co-founder of the business. We can get into the story and a lot of other things with Emily. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, guys. It's so nice to join you. I mean, you're absolutely right. When we first started the business, we actually, the sort of founding four, it was Sean LaPoitevin, Hugh Driscoll, who is now my husband, myself and Randall Love were the founding four of the business. And we had actually we're all working for the off-grid department at Solar Shop. And they decided that they didn't want to do that anymore and were closing it down. And we weren't particularly happy about that because off-grid was where we wanted to be. That's the work we loved. So we saw the opportunity and, took their blessing and started the company. So,
That's fantastic to see people like you, Emily, coming out of Solar Shop. I mean, they really did some great things in the early days. I remember going over to Adelaide, meeting with Adrian, and maybe I met you in those days too. Who knows?
Oh, who knows?
talking about all the great stuff that the Solar Shop was, really very, very progressive and pushing very, very hard. And they've done some amazing things in off-grid. So it's fantastic that you guys have come out of that, formed your own business and up and running. Good on you.
Yeah. Oh, it was a fabulous company to work for. I mean, when I started, I reckon there was maybe, 20 employees or something around that mark. And then when I left, there was like 300 employees. It was, it was an incredible place to work with some really, really fabulous people.
And what did it look like initially when you founded the business, got the wheels turning? What did that look like back then?
Industry-wise, you mean, for off-grid?
Industry-wise and just for you guys as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my story is an interesting one because I sort of fell into the industry by accident. So I'll maybe if I step back and go there first and then give a bit of a picture of what the industry sort of looked like. But so I actually a few years back I was asked to be the keynote speaker at Scotch College Melbourne, had their graduation ceremony, and had to do a speech for that, and got me thinking about how did I actually get my job at Solar Shop? How did that actually happen? And I retraced the steps. And the actual key moment that really started it all off was I had volunteered to be a fish at an arts fundraiser.
As you do.
So not your usual entry into the renewable energy industry, but so that led to me becoming the MC and then becoming on the Arts Council that arranged that event. And on that particular Arts Council had 3 people who were working at Soul Shop. And so when I finished my performing arts degree and desperately needed some cash, they got me the job, and kind of the rest is history. So that's how I sort of got into it. So I guess my perspective of how things were at that time was completely fresh. It was completely just coming in from a completely different area. I just thought it was a great job to have, that I could earn some cash and save the world at the same time. And so that's sort of how I came into it. But as far as a few years later, when we started Off-Grid Energy, there were a handful of companies across Australia that were doing off-grid seriously, but no one that I knew of that was really specialising in it and just doing off-grid. And not only did we see all of those customers that Solar Shop was sort of leaving by the wayside by closing that department, we also saw the opportunity there for someone who was a real specialist in that area. And so, we were, I hesitate to say one of a kind, but we were a rarity at the time really specialising in off-grid and battery storage back then. And it was all gels, all VRLAs, and
aren't we glad to be rid of those back-breaking things?
They're heavy buggers.
Now, I've got a question around the technology that you were installing back then. So I've no doubt that, there's some really good off-grid solutions now, more established and proven technology. What were you playing with back then, and what's the reliability been like in the meantime?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So when we started coming out of Solar Shop, we were very familiar with SMA. That was the big one that we used. We also used a little bit of Outback. But like I say, with gel batteries, that was all that was there. We didn't really touch wet cells. That was that we were a little bit past that at that point. But I think we probably started with Sonnenscheins and Battery Energy Australia, and I don't know, I'm racking my brain to try and think of the brands we used back then, but that was pretty stock standard for what we had back then. Certainly. And
the reliability, how's it been since then? Like, have you got customers that you had from the start of the business?
We do, a handful of our very first customers. Systems are still going strong, and that's 12, 13 years later. And we've had a handful that have upgraded their systems since then. They've bigger families, all that sort of stuff, and heard about this lithium thing that they wanted to get in on, and so we've done a few upgrades. But yeah, there's quite a few still out there that I mean, we find that if we don't hear from our customers, it's a good thing. It must mean everything's running smoothly.
Interestingly, on that one of the major modes of failure that's always been a part of the solar industry is capacitors. And I noticed in your background, you've got some Selectronics on the wall. Selectronic actually has a program where they can replace that part of the inverter that has the capacitors on it as a preemptive strike. If you repair or if you replace the capacitors, the inverter will probably live another 10 years. But if they fail, history is not recoverable after the damage is done, as in not economically recoverable. So maybe that's, I guess it's tough now. Gear's got a lot less expensive than it was back then. Hence, it might not even be economically viable to do that.
Yeah, I guess capacities of all components of the equipment have drastically improved so much in that time that, even if perhaps there was something that was recoverable, most people are looking at a relatively cheap cost to replace it anyway. So it does mean a lot more waste, which I hate. But often customers are they're looking to get the biggest and boldest and brightest and newest. And that does, at the moment, come with bigger capacities, which people are pretty happy to get.
On that, Emily, I always used to tell people that basically at 10 years, it wasn't a matter of replacing the inverters. It was a matter of replacing the whole system again. So if you've got people out there at sort of 12, 13 years, you're telling me that's what it looks like. Yeah, it is replacing the whole lot.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of an exact case, but mostly it's been batteries that have had the replacements that we've done for our certainly those early days customers. I can't actually think of someone that we've fully replaced yet, but I'm sure we have. But yeah, I mean, we'd be saying exactly the same thing. 10-year mark, you're looking at a wipe the slate clean, to come in, start again scenario. But yeah, there have been a few customers that they've sort of coming to the end of that sort of time frame. And
yeah, we're getting there. I mean, we've all been around now for 13, 14 years. So something that we did 10 years ago is definitely coming up. And if you designed it properly and the batteries were going to last 10 years, it's coming knocking.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been a few that have got in contact and we're sort of like, okay, well, your choice is either you jump now and you make that full replacement, or you've got a little bit of life left in them. So, you're gonna start to have some shutdowns. You're gonna start to see some quirky stuff going on. Maybe you could draw them out just that bit longer to get a bit more out of them. Or so it's sort of, we've had that conversation with, and it depends on the certain person, what they're like, how much frustration they want to deal with.
Same old story, right? Energy is an amazing luxury, and when you upgrade, you end up with so much more capacity, and you just use energy with gay abandon. We've seen that with people. Well, a customer of mine here in Victoria who does off-grid has an EV, and of course, when you upgrade for an EV, summertime you've got so much energy it doesn't matter.
You're laughing.
And if you've got enough in winter to run your EV, it's a real game changer in terms of quality of life. We can do a whole lot of things.
100%.
Well, you do get those retail customers who say, I got solar, I'm not getting the savings I thought I would, but after they got solar, their behaviour changed. So we've seen those complaints too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben, I got a question, because I cut my teeth in off-grid solar 30 years ago and seen enormous change over time. And I'm just intrigued to know the answer to a couple of questions from what you guys have experienced. So the first one is, what does the industry look like? The off-grid industry has usually been, a fairly small, well, it was the entire industry until on-grid came along, and then on-grid took off, and then off-grid got kind of relegated into the sidelines. And it's wonderful that specialists like you have popped up and really, really focused on, doing this so well. And traditionally, the off-grid market presented some real challenges because there was a fair bit of industrial and commercial stuff, cathodic protection and off-grid telecommunications is where it all started, all that kind of stuff. So presumably, are the segments that you operate in similar to what they've always been, or has that market changed?
That's a really good question. I mean, on the whole, it's probably remained fairly similar for us because
bit of industrial, bit of houseboat stuff down on the Murray, and then all the little off-grid stuff, and then the bigger farms and station country, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny, when we first started the business, we thought we were going to get a lot of farmers, a lot of super rural, a lot of all of that sort of stuff. Whereas actually it's just most of what we've done, sort of our bread and butter, has been domestic, fringe of grid. Someone's found their dream tree change property, and then all of a sudden they've gone, holy shit, it's going to cost me $200,000 to connect to the grid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's been pretty consistent over the years. The areas where that's happening has shifted, which is why we've had to spread ourselves nationally so that we've got that business to support our business. So that's remained fairly steady, but it definitely has changed in the last few years as the technology has evolved and gotten cheaper. It's become more viable for a lot more areas. Like you say, the commercial sector. I mean, we do play a little bit in the grid augmentation space as well. A lot of agriculture, diesel offset. It's becoming much more viable than it was, rather than just chucking a bunch of cheap diesel in and off you go.
Indeed, Ergon made an announcement this week. They're going to spend $28 million up in Doomadgee and a bunch of other places in North Queensland, which I visited 25 years ago, looking at putting solar in there, and they're finally doing it. They're going to displace $3 million or $4 million a year worth of diesel costs. I mean, the cost of running a diesel generator 24/7 to run a rural remote community is profoundly expensive. Absolutely. And presumably, and they talked about it in their announcement, that of course they have been impacted by fuel costs and everything else. So are you seeing a shift that is accelerating the interest and the economics for you because of changing fuel costs as well?
Yes. When we started, we thought diesel offset was going to be a big part of the business, and we quickly found that wasn't the case, and the business was in other areas. And I think that was just due to the low cost and availability of diesel at the time. Whereas now, absolutely, that's definitely changed. And like you say, with Ergon making that announcement, all of those big community diesel grids and even stations. We've got a few stations up in the Flinders Ranges who've done exactly that. A few quite remote places that have been running on either diesel for their station or for their community that are now switching because it's so much cheaper and easier to run it off renewables.
25 years ago, I was flying an aeroplane out to Daly River in the Northern Territory with diesel in the back because the road gets cut off during the wet season. They put in a diesel genset with 200,000 litres of storage. And of course, within a year, everybody in town had an air conditioner and they use a shitload of power. And of course, when it runs out, need more funding. And we were literally flying diesel in there. So obviously that's enormously expensive.
Yeah. And one last question, at risk of monopolising the conversation like Karl warned everyone that I probably would, but this is a favourite topic of mine. I'm intrigued about how the technology has changed for you guys. And over 10 or 13 years, you would have certainly seen that. And of course, batteries is the obvious one, the move to lithium and clearly that makes sense. But the biggest challenge that we saw in the very early days of off-grid was, in fact, how harsh Australia is. And so many international manufacturers that I used to work with when we used to import products when I worked for BP, we'd talk to international manufacturers and they go, yeah, we're getting ready to go to market, but we might just send some down to Australia to see if it's actually going to work. Because if you can make it work in Fraser Island, Alice Springs, and a couple of other places, it'll work anywhere in the world. So temperature, dust, humidity, all those kinds of things have always been the things that kill off-grid and really make it really, really challenging. And that's a particularly challenging issue for lithium batteries. Now, we know you can go big on solar now, right? So you can oversize the crap out of solar. So you just put you just put megawatts of solar in where as long as you've got space, you throw solar in, that's cheap, no brainer. The electronics is brilliant. We've got great companies like Cell Electronics who've got terrific tech that can do all the power conversion and everything else. But is the weak spot and the challenging part still around the batteries and the harsh climate that we're dealing with?
Like you say, lithium is definitely, you need to really look at temperature really carefully. But at the same time, you've got that extra depth of discharge. You can overspec the batteries more than you would normally in order to put in, your reverse cycles in the shipping container or in the room or wherever it is. And so you can put in extra, climate control that is energy hungry, without too much hassle. And so I think I certainly haven't found with the systems that we've designed for really hot areas, really remote areas, that hasn't really been a big problem because, the sort of insulation lined containers with your split systems in there and all that sort of stuff keeps everything relatively fine. And you can design the system to suit that extra load relatively easily and cheaply. That's not something I think that has been a struggle for us.
But that's with the batteries. I mean, lithium batteries are a 40-year-old technology. So in terms of degradation, what temperature does and what time does, it can be fairly accurate. One of the bigger issues has been solar panels because it's a much newer technology. It's very hard to do accelerated testing for, let's say, the Pilbara region or Kimberley region in northern WA. I've flown to Port Hedland. I was heading down to Kirrigini, and I got quite interested because there's a lot of solar panels up there at communication stations and so forth, and a lot of them are just browned out.
Mm.
I noticed at the Kirrigini resort, though, that they've got BP panels and they've got a ground mount array that's still humming along, Nige, which is interesting. But the point is that it's newer technology and they do accelerated testing. So I've seen this done on the inverter side at Fronius's R&D facility in Tauheim in Austria. And what they do is, I believe it's for every week in this particular room, it simulates 10 years in a certain condition with the heat, humidity, and so forth. With older technologies like lithium batteries, which I'm going to call it that, you've got that. But I feel that panels have been one of the weakest points in the last 10 to 15 years.
I want to get something.
Agree?
I think where you've got some proof of that point about the longevity and some of the lessons that have been learned, it would be Desert Knowledge Australia, right? Because that's still running. And, I was involved up there getting some of the early stuff up and running, and there's amazing data on the performance, the degradation of all sorts of different technologies. So some's done really, really well. Some hasn't quite done so well. And there's certainly a few brands up there that have come and gone over the years. But what Desert Knowledge has shown us, and it's such a wonderful example because it gets freezing temperatures, particularly overnight and early mornings up in the centre around in winter, and then it gets dry and hot in summer. So it's the most extreme environment you could get. And I think that's been a fantastic testing ground.
Emily, the question I have is, once we're talking containerized solutions and mining industry, a couple of portions of the market haven't lined up the way you thought that they would. Is that because it's too expensive at some point, and do you think that the market's going to grow into that, or why has it panned out differently from what you envisaged?
Just in those first early few years, it didn't pan out how we thought it would. But I certainly think that in the last few years, it's been an expected change, that growth into the mining sectors and all of the diesel offset projects and that sort of stuff. I think it makes sense now. I wouldn't say that's a surprise. It's certainly growing. It's certainly changing that area. I mean, even all the stuff that Western Power is doing over there with removing end of line customers and communities off their infrastructure, that is part of it as well. That opportunity is now there. The technology's there. It's cheap enough. It makes sense for them to mitigate that risk and take them off grid with those systems instead.
On that note, I heard Synergy recently, as in this week, awarded a contract for 200 megawatt hours and 100 megawatt of inverter capacity as an on-grid storage scenario. Is that something that off-grid is working towards as well? It seems like that's an enormous growth space, and you've got all of the expertise to get in there.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we like to stay in our lane. But really the only area that we do play in the grid-connected space is essentially the off-grid technologies and designs that we use in a grid-connected setting. So that sort of stuff, community batteries, grid augmentation, that kind of stuff is definitely where we play. And that opportunity is incredible. The grid.
We're adding the lanes, right? We're adding the lanes on the freeway. It's not a matter of staying in your lanes. We're adding a couple more.
Hey, we've all got to diversify.
And you've also got the big international players that come in and play in that space. So NEON currently has, I think, 3 gigawatts worth of renewables, including batteries, and they've targeted 10 gigawatts within a short period of time as well. So that's really interesting. Lots of those international players. You mentioned Western Power, so they've also worked with local contractors and companies to be rolling out those solutions, and Horizon Power in regional WA is doing the same thing.
Yep.
But there's also a place where you look at where coal plants are shutting down and massive battery farms are going in, and I think we're going to see more of it. So, and it needs to happen quickly.
Yes. It's fabulous. The rate of change at the moment is so exciting. I mean, our grid needs every level and type of storage to shore it up and make it 100% renewable as fast as we possibly can, and storage is the way to do it in all forms. You know, we're not all going to get snowy hydro in our backyard, but you know, community batteries and home batteries and all of that stuff is it's really exciting.
Well, live in snowy hydro, that's blown out, right?
Yeah, I was going to say we don't all have 12 billion either, Emily. So.
That'd be nice.
Well, we were talking about this off air before we started, but some friends of mine, you know, I'm part of a number of groups, and they're all electricians, and they said, well, we should be doing nuclear. So I did some research. It's around $8 billion per gigawatt of nuclear generation capacity. And of course, you can't build 1 gigawatt. You need to have a number of reactors on one site. And typically they're 2, 3 or 4 reactors. So somewhere like Melbourne and Sydney would need at least 2. And of course, if you're going to build 2, you might as well build 3. So we're talking, you know, $50 billion sort of investment. And I'm also Googled the number of people in our working population. So there's 29 million people in Australia. How many of those do you think are working, Nigel?
Well, I'm going to take a guess and say about half.
It's less than half, but it's
there
like 10. Of course, if you spread $50 billion over 10 years where it hasn't actually broken an atom yet, we're talking several $1,000s per family before you even break an atom. And I'm wondering how the hell you justify that when you can buy a wind turbine today and 3 months later it's generating power, you know. So I'm getting a return 3 months after I put the money down, as opposed to 10 or 12 years before it fires a shot.
I'm not even engaging. I mean, the only plausible place for this argument is that we really need to reduce our emissions much more quickly than we are globally. That's the one part of the equation where I go, I want to actually listen to this, and I want to consider whether there's something we're missing here, and whether nuclear is a solution. But clearly, nuclear is never going to stand up in Australia, and probably never many other places.
Well, we have the rooftops and we have the land, right?
Exactly. We've got it. When we've got this, and then we've got the solar and the wind resources. So it's never going to stack up here, no matter how many bloody Canadian energy ministers they roll out, courtesy of the National Party and various other people, to try and make nuclear sound good, which they're in the press today, trying to make it sound good. And it was just utterly ridiculous. 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Come on, mate. We're generating it here for 2 or 3 already. And large-scale renewables is already cheapest form. It's just utterly ridiculous.
It's such a political red herring. It's such a distraction.
Just a complete red herring.
That's exactly what it's there for. It's not a legitimate solution in Australia, and we've known that for decades. And it's just talk for the sake of distraction, really.
So, Emily, I wanted to jag aside a little bit. Now you're one of these amazing people who juggles 2 full-time jobs, one of them being with Off-Grid Energy and the other one being a parent as well.
When I started the business, I was juggling 2 careers. I was juggling a career in acting and the business. And it was tough to turn that brain off and turn that brain on. But it really taught me, how to multitask like anything. and how to switch really rapidly from one thing to another. And that's really served me well in running a business, I have to say. Surprisingly, there are a lot of things that I've taken from my performing arts life that are surprisingly really good for running a business. I know there's a quote, and I'm going to misquote him, but Hugh Jackman said something about every human should do acting training because it teaches you how to be present and how to listen properly. And I absolutely subscribe to that. That has absolutely helped me to really be in the moment and to listen to the people around me properly and really be present. So that's been something that, I've really gotten out of it. But, things like auditions and like they're brutal, man, and they are public. And so you have to deal with rejection and disappointment and all of that stuff on a public face and embarrassment and all of that stuff. And you've just got to take it on the chin and keep going and hope for the best. And most of the time you've got no fucking idea what you're doing, but you've just got to plow on anyway. And so
what sort
all
of
that
roles
stuff,
did you have?
Oh gosh, I did a little bit of Shakespeare. I did a lot of theatre, mainly. I did a few short films, and I was an extra in one feature film. I had one line, and they cut it out, so I didn't even make the damn credits.
It's a bit like this podcast, chopped
You're just
away.
going to cut me completely, yeah.
Luke and I talked about this on Monday. I did the performing arts on Sunday. I went and saw Moulin Rouge with the family.
Very nice.
And it turns out if there's 7 of you and you stop at the pub for a bowl of chips and a couple of pints on the way there, it's $2,000 to take the family to Moulin Rouge. So we're big fans of the performing arts. So just got to find someone else to pay for it next time.
Well, speaking of a few drinks, that's definitely something my performing arts degree served me well for the solar industry and dealing with post-event parties. It was certainly, this is not the path I would have ever dreamed that I would end up in, to the point where imposter syndrome central for me. I spent so many years, because I don't have a technical background. I don't, I'm not an installer. I'm not an electrician. I literally have my performing arts degree and that's it. So for a long time, I really struggled with the fact that I was running a business, and that's valid. So, yeah, it took me a while to overcome that, but definitely the traits of things like just saying yes to things, even though I have no idea if I can actually do them and I could fail miserably, but just saying yes anyway and throwing myself in the deep end, that's all come from my performing arts degree. So, yeah, that's definitely served me well.
That's some great lessons, Emily. And for what it's worth, we're all dangerous idiots. So don't worry about it.
Speak for yourself, Nigel. Speak for yourself.
So, Emily, you were nominated for the 40 under 40.
I was listed in the 40 under 40. So it's the 40 best business leaders in Australia, in South Australia, under 40 years old. So that was pretty amazing. I was nominated by my colleague Claire, which was pretty special. And I thought I was just going for some free drinks and a nice meal and a good night out away from parenting duties, but ended up on the list, which is pretty special.
I suppose your team would be pretty important to you, and they, nominate you for things like this. Like, huge. How big's your team, and how do you build team culture and make the whole thing hum?
Yeah, I work with some excellent humans. I think we've got 15 at the moment. We've hovered between 15 and 20 over the last couple of years. And it always sounds really naff when business owners say this, but I actually really do consider them family. A lot of them have been with the business for many, many years, some since the first few days. And they are all exceptional people. And me and Hugh, my husband, would just do anything for these guys. They're the best. And we wouldn't exist without them. A business doesn't run off just the work that we do. It's the work that every single person in our business does. Yeah, that's really important. And I think because that's the relationship we have with them, that the business culture flows on from that, and it doesn't need to be said that we look after them, because you look after family. So yeah, they're
it's the old cliche that culture runs down from the top, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I hope we have a good one. And more so, mums when mums come back into the workforce, they are the most motivated, organised, multitasking legends. They are the best people you can hire because they just get shit done.
That's because we want to earn enough money to
true.
leave them in daycare, yeah? We leave them in daycare. Shitloads easier to go to work.
Full-time parenting is hard work. Like, it's harder than work. So going to work after you've been a full-time parent for a short period of time is so much easier than being a full-time parent. And so, yeah, work is, sorry, I'm speaking for myself, but work was an escape for me. I had to get back into work to use my work brain again. And I was so much more productive than beforehand.
Apart from working and being a great mum, how do you decompress? What are the things that you do to manage your own well-being?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question for someone who runs an off-grid business because we are an essential service. We are on call 24/7, 7 days a week. It's always the, Easter Sunday, Boxing Day, like they're the times that we get the most amount of phone calls. And it's actually been funny whenever we've tried to have, a couple of weeks off or whatever, there's always been some big event that's happened while we've been away. So, and because Hugh and I work together as well, we run the business together, we see each other 24/7. It's been a really important one for us to make sure that we do have those moments of not being business owners. And it's been a really a tricky one for us to actually find where that balance is. But I think we've landed on a pretty good routine now, where we spend alternate 1 day a week at home with our little boy, and we do give each other some space on weekends. We make sure each person has their time, their space, doing whatever they want to do, whether that's going to see a movie by yourself or going for a walk. Or I'm a bit of a crafty person. I like doing painting and gardening and all of those sorts of things as well. So I think also registering for yourself and for your partner that this particular moment in time is, something's going on, or just picking up the signs that something's going on for that person. So maybe they need, like, Hugh might be going through a particularly stressful point. And so that's when I pick up the slack in other areas, and he does the same for me, and noticing that in someone else so they don't have to do the heavy labor of noticing it for themselves when they're also going through whatever they're going through. So
very selfless of you, Emily, to be able to figure that stuff out.
All right, so there's not time for much more. I'll just whip around quickly if there's any last comments or questions to go. Shoot, Nigel.
Two really quick things. One, congratulations, Emily, on being part of a success story and bringing off-grid energy into the future, and more power to you as a mum and having a partner in the business as well. Amazing, fantastic. Please get out there and work with some of the other great women, especially the younger women in the industry, and share some of your knowledge and wisdom. Secondly, I wasn't going to go to Brisbane for Smart Energy next week, but the boss gave me a tap on the shoulder and said, get up there. So I'll see you guys in Brisbane next week, and look forward to bumping into everyone else up there.
We'll see you there, Nigel. Look forward to it. Karl, what about you, mate?
I think you won in the word count, Nigel.
I'll let you know.
Probably.
Use AI, get a transcript. I'll let you guys know. I'll put the scoreboard up. And Emily, thanks for coming on today. Are there any last thoughts or comments you want to add in?
I do want to give my husband and business partner Hugh a bit of a shout out. He's running a business can be a bit of a thankless job sometimes, and he's bloody hardworking, loyal, generous, and he is the best kind of leader. I think a lot of businesses in this industry who've been around, who've done the hard yards, have a type of person like this at their heart. And Hugh is definitely that person, and anyone who he's worked with can attest to that as well. But so I just wanted to give him a bit of a shout out because he isn't really one for the spotlight.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on, Emily. So Emily Driscoll from Off Grid Energy Australia. It's been a great conversation. So wish you all the best, and we'll see you around soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Please follow us on socials, and we'll catch you next time.